tell you just a little bit about them. One of my personal favorites are the Commonwealth speakers, who really visit every county in Pennsylvania, telling stories, small performances. Another absolute favorite is Read All About It, and this is through the library system. It encourages not only reading, but discussing what you've read. Another great program that we offer is a grants program. We offer grants to local organizations to support their programs and also to assist in bringing our programs into the area.
How often do you have these events?
We are part of partnerships within the community, weekly, monthly, seasonal. It depends. Check our calendar. It's listed at www.pahumanities.org on the web. I'm sure you'll find something you like.
Well, thank you, Ann and Brian. You know, the humanities really are the key to unlocking the things that we're passionate about, like our culture and our identity. And speaking of that, what do you say we go back now to hear more from our special guest, Frank Fitzpatrick. Please welcome him.
Well, thank you again. And in this half, I think we'll take a look at Updike's Pennsylvania roots a little more detail, a little more closely. Here's a picture of him as a 9-year-old, and it's outside his house in Shillington reading a book, as you can see. So, he was born during the Great Depression in 1932 in Reading Hospital, which is still one of the foundations of that community. Updike liked to say that Reading was a place that made things, but the hospital of his birth, I believe, is now the largest employer in the Reading area. Another bit of recent news that would have dismayed the author is that Reading is now the nation's poorest city, which is kind of hard to believe, but it's true. By what standards, I'm not sure. But at the time he was born, the city hummed. His parents struggled economically, and when their only child was born, they lived with his maternal grandparents in a handsome house in Shillington, just a few miles west of downtown Reading. That's the house in Shillington now. It's currently an office building, but it looks much as it did when he was a boy. His mother, Linda Hoyer, had been born on the farm in Plowville, 12 miles south of Shillington. She attended Ursinus College, where she met her future husband, Wesley Updike, and studied to be a teacher. Both graduated in 1923. His mother went on to get her master's at Cornell, but after one day of student teaching, decided that she wasn't cut out for the profession and gave that up. Wesley Updike, his father, was of Dutch descent, and not Pennsylvania Dutch, but actual Dutch descent. Had been raised in and around Trenton, New Jersey, where his family had long farmed. While Updike's mother was mostly a frustrated writer, his father, after going through a number of unrelated jobs in a manner not atypical during the Depression, became a math teacher at Shillington High School. John Updike would graduate from Shillington High School as both the president of his senior class and the co-valedictorian. Went on to win a scholarship to Harvard. Find a student from those days, and I've come across many who remember Mr. Updike, his father, and they all have a story about this man and how eccentric he was. Once, when he couldn't quiet his class by normal means, he climbed onto the windowsill of his second-story room and threatened to jump. Another said that when a student had difficulty grasping the concept of a decimal point, he threw open the window, grabbed a handful of snow, packed it into a snowball, fired it against the blackboard, and said, that is a decimal point. As a boy, John Updike developed an early interest in the cartoons in the New Yorker. At 10, he accurately predicted that he would one day work for the magazine, although he foresaw himself as an artist, not as a writer. His love of art was fed by frequent Sunday visits to the Reading Museum, which was just alongside the hospital. The beloved only child in a house filled with adults, Updike enjoyed what he always described and portrayed as an idyllic childhood. I loved Shillington, not as one loves Capri or New York, because they are special, he later wrote, but as one loves one's own body and consciousness, because they are synonymous with being. That love affair began in the house at 117 Philadelphia Avenue. White now, but for a time in his childhood, a surprisingly garish combination, for conservative Berks County anyway, of green and yellow. The house, which backs onto the property the high school occupied, also once adjoined the county's poorhouse. That poorhouse, the Berks County Almshouse, as it was formerly known, was a great yellow Gothic building. It must have been an ominous presence in a young boy's life. And not surprisingly, it would become the setting for his first novel, The Poorhouse Fair. The wall, its height slightly waving like a box hedge, enclosed 4 1/4 acres, he wrote in The Poorhouse Fair. There was a hell of a big yellow house back from the wall. Old people were crawling around like bugs on a lawn. Updike used to say his father was kind of comforted by living next to the poorhouse because he felt if it ever came time when he needed to go there, all he had to do was walk. But Updike was a reluctant memoirist. Never wanted anyone to do a biography of him, that resisted offers to do his own autobiography. But when he finally got around to doing one, 1989's Self-Consciousness, it began with him wandering the streets of Shillington on a spring evening in a nostalgic reverie. Except for the automobile traffic and the absence of the movie theater and soda shop that were such a large part of his life, the town where, by the way, my wife and I lived immediately after we were married, just to show you how obsessed I actually was. It wasn't for that reason, but we did end up there. But it's not so different from when Updike lived there. It's not so unlike the Olinger he wrote about so often. This is kind of the main street. It used to be Route 222, which takes you right out to Lancaster. This is the town hall, which sits at an unusual 5-cornered intersection where, as a young boy, Updike was actually hit by a car. The elementary school he attended still stands. He called it a big brick cube stuck in a square of black surfacing, though now it has been converted into an office building. A neighborhood playground once resided in that schoolyard, a place that a middle-aged Updike would describe in his poem, Midpoint, which is a touching reflection on aging. The playground's dust once was richer than loam, and green as Eden, the slow path home. No snow have been as deep as those my sled caressed to ice before I went to bed. Perhaps senility will give me back the primitive rapport I lately lack. The high school he attended and where his father taught, it was 7th through 12th grade then, has since been swallowed up by a newer facility, Governor Mifflin Middle School. But if you can see the portion of older brick there on the inside of that building was the original high school when Updike attended there. And that far window, I believe, is the room 201 where his father's antics were performed. And one of the most telling events in Updike's fiction and his life took place in Shillington, Olinger, and is chronicled in the story Flight, which is a great story to begin with Updike, I think. And as I said, his mother was a wannabe writer who eventually did publish a few stories. But her greater claim to literary fame is that early on she recognized an artistic genius in her son and kind of pushed him in that direction. In this story, the mother and son are out for a Sunday walk and decide to climb one of the hills that border Shillington. When I was 11 or 12, just on the brink of ceasing to be a little boy, you can see Reading in the distance. You see the courthouse, that tall white building there, and that's Mount Penn in the background. When I was just 11 or 12, just on the brink of ceasing to be a little boy, my mother and I, one Sunday afternoon, my father was busy or asleep, hiked up to the top of Shale Hill, a child's mountain that formed one side of the valley that held our town. There the town lay under us, Olinger, perhaps 1,000 homes, the best and biggest of them climbing Shale Hill toward us. And beyond them, the blocks of brick houses, 1 and 2 family, the homes of my friends, sloping down to the pale thread of Alton Pike. On the other side lay more homes, including our own, a tiny white patch placed just where the land had begun to rise toward the opposite mountain, Cedar Top. Suddenly she, his mother, dug her fingers into the hair on my head and announced, "There we are, and there we'll forever be." She hesitated before the word forever, and hesitated again before adding, "Except you're going to fly." That image of flight as a metaphor for his departure from Pennsylvania and the literary life he eventually would lead recurs often in Updike. So many great stories of Shillington followed. In fact, once Updike said that if someone asked him to give him just one of his books, which would it be? And he said the Olinger Stories, which that collection, ironically, is out of print now, though they can be found in those stories can be found in a fairly recent book called The Early Stories, and which I believe the library has here. I think I saw it down in the case downstairs. In some way, he would never leave Shillington. And he said, it was a fortunate life, of course, college, children, wives, enough money, minor fame, but it had all, from the age of 13 on, felt like not quite my idea. Shillington, its idle alleys and darkened four-square houses, had been my idea. While Updike was a student at Shillington High, he often attended basketball games because his father, who also coached the swim team, was the ticket seller. And perhaps unconsciously, watching those games led Updike to create his most memorable character, Harry Angstrom, Rabbit, the fallen basketball hero of the famed tetralogy. Interestingly, in 2002, a panel of literary critics was asked to name the 5 greatest characters in literature post-1900. And they selected Jay Gatsby, of course, Holden Caulfield from The Catcher in the Rye, Humbert Humbert from Lolita, Leopold Bloom from Ulysses, and Rabbit, which kind of exalted company for a little kid from Reading. But anyway, one of the most famous, recognizable passages in all of Updike's work is the opening to Rabbit and Run, in which he describes Rabbit coming upon a boys' pickup basketball game in an alleyway in Reading. And interestingly enough, this is the first we see of Harry Angstrom in the first Rabbit book. And in the last Rabbit book, he takes us back. He has a fatal heart attack on a basketball court, so it kind of is a nice frame for the life of Rabbit. This basketball kind of frames his entire existence. And bear with me a little, because this is somewhat of a lengthy passage, but I think it'll give you an example of the power of Updike's writing. Boys are playing basketball around a telephone pole with a backboard bolted to it. Legs, shouts, the scrape and snap of Keds on loose alley pebbles seems to catapult their voices high into the moist March air, blue above the wires. Rabbit Angstrom, coming up the alley in a business suit, stops and watches, though he's 26 and 6'3". So tall he seems an unlikely rabbit, but the breadth of white face, the pallor of his blue irises, and a nervous flutter under his brief nose as he stabs a cigarette into his mouth partially explain the nickname, which was given to him when he too was a boy. Then a ball bounces to him and he picks it up. The ball, rocketing off the crotch of the rim, leaps over the heads of the 6 and lands at the feet of the 1. He catches it on the short bounce with a quickness that startles him. As they stare hush, he sights, squinting through the blue clouds of weed smoke, a suddenly dark silhouette like a smokestack against the afternoon spring sky, setting his feet with care, wiggling the ball with nervousness in front of his chest, one widespread white hand on top of the ball and the other underneath, jiggling it patiently to get some adjustment in air itself. The cuticle moons on his fingernails are big. Then the ball seems to ride up to the right lapel of his coat and comes off his shoulder as his knees dip down, and it appears the ball will miss, because though he shot from an angle, the ball is not going toward the backboard. It was not aimed there. It drops into the circle of the rim, whipping the net with a ladylike whisper. "Hey," he shouts in pride. The beauty of that passage aside, as a sports writer, I feel compelled to point out that what Updike is describing there in 1960 is a one-handed set shot, something that, alas, has gone the way of the Inquirer magazine. The ticket-selling father that we talked about earlier also appears in another of my favorite stories, In Football Season, which on its surface is little more than an account of a boy and his friends walking back to Shillington after a high school game in Reading, football game, but in reality is a breathtakingly sad look at the loss of innocence. In the story, the young Updike character, his walk completed, is waiting outside a Shillington house late on a Friday night, peering through the window as his father, who has borrowed from the proceeds earlier in the week, counts the ticket revenue. By then, the family had moved to the farm in Plowville, so a long ride still awaited father and son. We lived 10 miles away, and I could not go home until my father was ready. Some nights it took until midnight. It was late, very late, but I was not blamed. It was permitted. Silently counting and expertly tamping the coins into little cylindrical wrappers of colored paper, the men ordered and consecrated this realm of night into which my days had never extended before. The hour or more behind me, which I had spent so wastefully in walking when a trolley would have been swifter, and so wickedly in blasphemy and lust, was past and forgiven me. It had been necessary, so it was permitted. Now I peek in the windows,